Hi, everyone. It's Lori Silverman with the episode 5 of Level Up with Lori. I'm really thrilled today that my guest is Michael Leckie. Michael and I met when he was kind of like what I'd say in this transition phase. I think it was like February of 2016. I was living in Scottsdale, and Michael was with Gartner, and he was attending the Gartner. Is it the annual event that was going on?
The CIO Leadership Forum they just held in, yeah.
Yeah, and our a mutual colleague, David Meredith, suggested that I meet Michael, and we have been colleagues, and I would hope that I could say that we've been friends ever since.
I think so.
And he left Gartner to go to work at GE, and I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time, what I call shadow coaching, like behind the scenes, I guess, or a little bit with you there, which was really lovely. So welcome, Michael. I gave a title to this show that's very, what do I say? I think more of a teaser. And I said that the title was Your Data and Digital Efforts Will Fail If You Don't Have This. And so I want to kind of give a little bit of background about what made me kind of come up with this. And let me just see here on my notifications. I want to see who's joining us. Great. So the McKinsey in October of last year put out a paper that said transformational changes, and you've been working in the digital transformation space now for many years, are failing at a rate of about 3 and 4. And they conclude that it's because people aren't focusing on, or leaders aren't focusing on people, not the project, which is nothing new. And those statistics, right, have been around for gobs and gobs and gobs of years. Yet there's a really interesting observation that I think you and I have been having, and that is in the digital space, the data literacy space, the data analytics space, chief data officer space. Everyone says, oh, yes, transformation's needed. And then they don't take responsibility for it. They don't do anything about it. And the most you might hear them do is what I call little c, little m change management, not big organizational change management, the OCM. They might say to me, oh, and we're doing training, Lori. We're training individuals, or we have a communications plan, or we've got a named sponsor. And I'm like, I am not certain, because of my experiences, and I think you've seen the same thing, that this works. So talk to us about this. Like, why is true transformation needed in the digital data analytics space? And what exactly do you mean by transformation?
Well, for me, I guess, what's happened in the past is we've used these processes or tools. So maybe the tools are, great predictive analytic capabilities and great data and access to more and more data. Or maybe it's great digital tools. We're digitizing our processes and systems we have now, or creating new things. But we're still kind of operating. A friend of mine said we're working with 5th generation information technology and 2nd generation human systems. We're still operating in a fairly hierarchical leadership decides the path, everyone else goes and execute it model of success, which just doesn't work when technology and data are making the ability and the need to make decisions lower in the organization, close to the customer, and have the power and authority and responsibility and belief that you're not only allowed to do that, but expected to do that so close to the customer. It's just not happening enough. So we have these great potential possibilities and tools, and we don't have people, I guess, that are comfortable or feel like they can actually use them in the way they're intended. So, it's great if you got if you're driving a Porsche, that's great. But if you only go 20 miles an hour because you're scared to go faster than that, what's the point,
Yeah, exactly. Let's hold on that thought for just a second. If you've joined us today, please do us a favor. Let us know that you're with us. Announce yourself. Tell us who you are, what country you're beaming to us from or streaming with us from, a little bit about your background. That's always helpful for Michael and me. And always feel free to comment and ask us questions, because this is more of a talk show format, the way that I like to provoke thought, I guess you could say. So I want to go back. That's a perfect analogy, the Porsche example, right? I give you this speed car, this gorgeous speed car, and then you just kind of go really slow, or you haltingly go forward, right? And so what you're suggesting is that's like the people or the cultural side or the transformation side of the organization is like we're haltingly going forward, or we're using, can I say, human-based technology that's in some ways, I guess, archaic. I mean, when I think about like how people approach transformation today, that's my observation. But I'm out there on a limb. My guests know that I say things that are a little bit more controversial.
Well, I think that what's happened is, I mean, digital technology changed the game, whether we like it or not. And I think we all recognize it to some extent. But two things happened that were different. First, we always talk about, hey, the pace of change is so much faster, but also the complexity of the problems we're trying to solve and how fast the problem is becoming a new problem we're not used to. And our organizations were built on this idea, again, of, you know, the smartest people at the top with the greatest strategies and the best people to execute it got the job done. And as long as the problems were simple enough and the problem themselves was not changing so fast, we had the time to do that. It's not that it's a bad approach, just we don't have the time for it anymore because it gets old too fast. But our organizations aren't built to drive the power down. Like one of the things you and I have talked about. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have these great data analytics tools. And I look at this and I want to be data driven. It's like, oh, there's the answer. I've got the data. I know how to use it. I know how to formulate questions. Boom, there's the answer. Who do I need to talk to before I do what I know I need to do now so I don't get my ass handed to me?
Right. Well, and I think that there's a false notion. I want to go back to what you said earlier. When life was slower and it was less complex, and we could do what I'm calling more incremental or continuous change. Transformation's discontinuous change, right? It's leapfrogging. It's something that's completely different. So everything is shifting so fast. But in times past, we had the luxury of training every single person and having each person discover and having each person do certain sorts of things because it was directed from on high. And now we don't. We have to start thinking about new and different ways. I do want to tell you about some folks who've joined us today, because we got a bunch of people who are with us. This is so cool. Vince, I know, has joined us from Toronto. Hey, Vince. David Wilkinson has joined us. He works as a software provider. And he said, Michael, you're right. If the tool I provide is not easier than the pencil and paper that has always been used, I lose from the beginning. Yeah. Right? I think that's a great analogy. Jermaine St. Dennis has joined us from Toronto. He's a strategy consultant who helps people with adaptive change.
I know Jermaine. Good
yep. And he's an architect of people first. So that's really cool. And Yulia is joining us today. Oh, this is so exciting. And she says, listening and watching with interest, the problems are rarely simple.
Yeah, true.
Right. And I think that that's what we're missing is, and I don't know, I'll give you a framework I use and add to this or change this around for me. I've been for years using Linda Ackerman and Dean Ackerman's model of there are three different types of change. There's developmental change, which requires people to be trained. There's transitional change, which is like I'm switching out one thing for another, but the thing I'm switching out is similar to the old. And then they talk about transformation, but they say that there are two types of transformation. Conscious, like a leader says, I really want to do this and has strategically thought through kind of like what the frame looks like. And then there's the reactive transformation, which I think we see more. And to that, I've added something I call perpetual change, which I know you talk about, because you say that transformation is not a one and done.
Right.
Right. I mean, so take that further for us, because that's keeps along with the analogy of the car or the paper and pencil comment that was made as well.
Yeah, well, I was at George Bernard Shaw said that, all great truths begin as blasphemy. So I guess the blasphemy I'd start with is that, everyone's job has changed to everyone's job being changed. And that's not just a pithy thing to say. I think we're at a place in the world where we have lost the luxury of specialization. We move to this world of I'm specialized here, I'm specialized here, I'm specialized here. As long as I have the deep, deep knowledge, we put all these specialized things together, the machine works and it flows. But the machine analogy no longer works for our organizations, because by the time the machine is built, the problem it's solving, the product it's putting out is dated in most cases. So we really have to understand that the role of leaders has completely shifted from, organizing to humanizing, building relationships, building connections between people so that they have enough trust to make decisions together and get things done. They need to step away from knowing and focus. I think Ed Hess's work on from humility is the new smart around, constantly learning and constantly stopping and saying, okay, what did I know to be true tomorrow that may no longer be true today? And how does it impact my decisions? That's the job of leaders now. And it's a very, very different job. It's a very unsettling job. It's a job many of them don't know how to do.
Right.
And so we're asking so much of them in so many ways. They've got to be, the peacemaker, and they've got to be someone who, is exciting and engaging and thoughtful, and yet, smart and operational, almost ruthless and financial, and all these different things. It's gotten kind of silly what we're asking of leaders. And now we're at a point where we need to say, look, your job is understanding how change actually works and giving people what they need to make the changes. Decide what they are and make them.
Right, but that's not where organizations are going in the digital data analytics space, is it? I mean, and I just want to introduce a few more people before I take that a step further, but I wanted to tease you with that. Yulia has said reactive transformation equals let's automate something. Brad Safer came on to join us. He said, I got an alert that you guys are talking, so I decided to join you. And David's with us. They love the word humanizing, by the way. I think that's what you're about to pick up on next. And then David Wilkinson says to us, yes, Lori, that is correct about top-down as well. The problem is often not that the tool is not good. It's that it's siloed to the area where it's being deployed, and it's not providing the ability to influence the whole organization. It can create a more lag time and stifle communication. Michael's comment on specialization is correct. The tool has to be holistic. But it's interesting as these fiefdoms, I guess I don't have a better word for it, are merging in organizations, digital fiefdom, the data and analytics fiefdom, because now there's an article today from Tom Davenport on that CDOs believe that those things should go together. All these fiefdoms are being put into place. But when you look at the job descriptions, tell me how much you see on the transformational change side that those people need to know and do.
Yeah, not near enough. I mean, again, it's a job around what do I specialize in? And now the person who's leading the technology, the digital, the data side, well, that's the savior for everything. They're expected to specialize in all of it, which is just inane. But they're not putting into that role that driving transformation is what it's all about. Now, and one of the issues is you have a lot of people in these roles that are technically incredibly savvy, and it may not be the people in organizational side where their savvy is. Nonetheless, they have to develop enough of it. And what I see happening is I see a lot of discussion around let's change the culture, and a lot of efforts around let's train some people and give them more of these skills. What I rarely ever see is the top leadership team standing up and saying, this is how we change. Now, I'll give you an example of one that I thought was really impressive.
Please do.
Yeah. As you know, my friend of mine, Michael Bungay-Stanier, who wrote the Coaching Habit, a good friend, he's done a lot of work with Microsoft. And recently he was there at their big Microsoft Ready conference in front of several thousand of their top, sales executives. And JP Courtois, who is the global head of sales, sat down and was coached live by Michael on stage, and actually got into some areas where he was like, I hadn't seen that. I hadn't realized that. And he gave a role model of saying, you know what? I have to learn. I have to change. I have to look at myself. I have to see what has to be different, which is not something that, I mean, this is an executive at the top of his game, at the top of his, income level, saying what I have to role model is being vulnerable and thinking through what don't I know. That's just such a rare example that we're not seeing in the marketplace. And it's not something we're asking of our leaders either, which I think is a real shame.
Well, and I think what you're getting at is that we talk the talk, but we don't understand the implication. I always said, and I've been blessed over the last 30 some years of consulting to work across 25 industries with some really phenomenal leaders. And my comment when we partner to do transformation is, you're going to have to change more than anyone else in this organization.
Yeah.
That's my comment to C-suite leaders. And you're the ones who need the coaching, and you're the ones who need the mentoring. Now, people might, as they're listening to this, say, well, what does that mean if I'm at the bowels of the organization? Can I make transformation happen? And I do think we need to come back to that, because the answer is yes. Grassroots transformation can happen. You just have to be wildly strategic about who you know and what you do and what you say and how you start to coach people. But I want to go back to something. Is that the only thing that's causing these transformation efforts to be unsuccessful, that senior leaders aren't taking on this transformation role? Or are there some other things? I know that you've written a paper that talks about several other issues.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I don't know everything that's happening in the world there. I'll put that right up front. But I do think that oftentimes we're leaving the defining of what like digital or what the uses of data are up to the digital and the data people, and not making it the purview of the whole organization and involving them. And, saying, look, what we're moving into is not a new vertical. What we're moving into is new tools, new ways of working, new ways to solve problems, to find problems, even more to the point. And so we're not doing it horizontally. We're still doing a lot of things vertically. And I think, another thing that I get concerned about is people haven't then thought about, well, what does digital actually mean to us today? What is the digital problem we're trying to solve? Are we digitizing current, processes and systems or products? Are we creating new products or services or revenue streams by what we can bring together with technology? Or is it just the way of working in a much more, agile or lean methodology, but across the organization in our mindset, even when we're not building software? So getting some clarity around that, I think, is important. And the last thing I'd say, you're probably referring to the article I published with Leading Edge Forum around the Expirational Leader. I don't think it's possible for any organization to do this alone within its own closed system, because the culture is too strong. And I don't think you can outsource it, because then the culture won't accept it. It just goes away. And I think it's an ecosystem play where you have to have partners that are long-term to a point, not land and expand forever, but come in for a period of time that's set to help bring all of the things that they can bring into the organization, and then get out and make sure that they are not necessary. I don't see that model happening as much. I see the do it in-house and bring people in, or I see the outsource it to a big name, because then at least we tried.
Right. So I want to hold on that piece for a second, but I want to come back and I want to elaborate on a couple of things that you mentioned. Before I do that, there's a couple of more comments for us. Vince is saying, being able to admit you need help is so powerful. Lenka has said to us, Michael, so true what you've just said. And Vince then comments and says, everyone thinks it's automation, that's like the answer, which we know it's not. David adds to it by saying, this is why there is inaction. Not knowing where to start, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you and I will come back and talk more about. And Yulia adds to that, yes, we can't just provide analytics for everything. We need to first define the business problems. So there's a couple of things I want to comment on. One is a bugaboo I have, that everybody talks about transformation as the last mile. I am so like, I'm going to write a paper, maybe we do this together, that it's the first mile. Yeah. This is not a sequential set of things. But that comes from this, I think, the silo sort of mentality, because I'm building up the technology expertise, or the data or the analytics expertise. That what we are talking about is that discontinuous transformational change runs in parallel with whatever you're trying to do. And it may even be the piece that you think about first, because that's what you were saying. Leaders need to have this skill set. Am I hearing you correctly? I mean, that it's not like the add-on piece. It's the piece that comes before everything else, so that we're thinking about, who do we need to involve? How do we need to strategize? What are the implications, as you said, to the whole of the organization? I think that's the enterprise implications are huge too. This is not a little project I try out someplace, right?
No.
The second thing that I want to comment on, because Spencer Sobczak gave me this comment. I was thinking through some things in the data arena. We talk about data democratization, and I said to him, I don't think that's the right word, because my work is not focused on the data, because I think data is meaningless unless there's a decision. And he said to me in a private conversation, then what you're talking about, and I think, Michael, this relates to what you said earlier about the bowels of the organization and how do we empower people. It's about decision democratization. Right? It's about allowing, how do we empower the people at the front line to make the decisions? It's not just giving them the data, because we're still hang tying them. And that's because we haven't assessed the whole of the organization to understand the complexity and the pieces that need to shift. What we assess is digital, or we assess data and analytics, or the enterprise data management piece, but we don't look at the totality of what needs to be impacted. Am I tracking?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly. I mean, I think absolutely right that it's that, decision democratization. And what's difficult is that, because we've all heard over the years, hey, we got to push decision-making down, push it out closer to the customer.
Right.
But how do you make good decisions with others is you have a dialogue with them until you explore and work through and make a decision. We're now saying you decide, but we're not including you in the dialogue. Yeah. And so one of the things that I actually did some work recently with my old thesis advisor at USC and Pepperdine, Chris Worley, and the great Sue Morman out at USC around organization design. And Chris made a comment around, he goes, look, design is change, because design is simply walking around like Galbraith's star model and saying, what's the strategy? What are the capabilities, right? What are the processes? How are decisions made and direction set and the people rewards? But that conversation isn't a strategic conversation, meaning strategic happens only at the top of the house. It's a strategic conversation that has to happen everywhere. Wherever I'm at in the organization, whatever my role is, if I'm on the line and responsible for the new packaging for how the product's going to go out, I need to be thinking about, when we are all of a sudden moving to a different packaging, is there anything that we're not set up to do that right? Where are we going to get stuck? Are we rewarding people the wrong way? Everybody should be thinking that way. That's not the purview of leadership, but until they're thinking that way and talking that way, then they're never going to be comfortable making those decisions. And quite frankly, leaders are never going to be comfortable truly letting go of the decisions for people to make it. So they have to engage in the dialogue, and that's just not happening enough. It's still sitting up here.
Well, not only is it sitting up there, I think, but we don't allow the time and the space for it to happen. So I know I just covered, I teach a graduate course on strategic thinking, but it's the only course in the world in an industrial and organizational psych program. So it has all of these elements to it. And we spent an entire week on dialogue. And it's such a difficult concept for people to grasp. But the other thing that I think you're talking about is a notion, and I'm going to go back to the early 90s, because we now talk about this as the operating model. I think that's Boston Consulting Group's newest term for this. But there's a body of work that happened with Delta Consulting Group many years ago called organizational architecture. And that's what you're talking about, which is, if I can't just like bring in a change and say, okay, how does it impact the enterprise data management portion of the business? Or the digital portion of the business. It's about looking at every other aspect, my talent aspect, my rewards and recognitions, my policies, my procedures, I still remember talking to a tech leader, and he had hired a company to help him. They were mapping processes, and this wasn't all that long ago. And I said, oh, are you mapping decisions to the processes? He looked at me and he said, Lori, don't ask for too much. I talked to another leader in November who was keynoting at a conference that I was doing a workshop at, and I asked him the same thing, and he goes, why would I want to do that? That's the missing, right? Those are missing pieces, because that's where it's close to the work and we can involve people. But these, like you said, this is not just a conversation and an assessment up here. It's a conversation that has tentacles this way and this way. Am I visually showing that? I mean,
I think so. Yeah. I mean, in fact, there was a great podcast conversation actually on Pat Lencioni's podcast show recently. And he actually talked about how he thinks a lot of times sports and how we've been in schools has driven this, again, specialization thinking. And we've lost the ability to be generalists. You've got someone like the people you're talking to, probably brilliant people, probably know what they know, but there's things before and there's things after and above and below that solution they have that are going to make that solution go completely sideways. And that's what's happening as well to our digital and data solutions. We're not taking the whole system into consideration. We're not looking at the whole operating model or organizing architecture, however we want to phrase it. We're not engaging everyone and let's look at the whole thing,
right,
and then know my place in it, but also reach out and connect and have the time and the space to have those organic connections. And a lot of that, and we talked earlier about, I mentioned, humanizing over organizing, and humanizing, I mean, stolen completely from the great Ed Schein and his work and
right,
thinking.
absolutely.
And it's one of the concepts in the book I'm working on, but is that, look, if we don't take the time for you to know me and me to know you, and I to know what you value and how you work and what your family situation is and what matters to you and what your skill is and where you want to go, then how are we going to reorganize to get the work done? We're not. We're going to wait for somebody else to organize us. And we're probably not going to be optimally organized. I remember I was working at one company a while back, and all we were realizing is that every day we were spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to recruit people that we were letting go over here and paying tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in severance to, because the system didn't talk and because we treated people like roles, not like human beings. That, I know that sounds soft and fuzzy, but it's actually not. It's hard. It's hardcore to really understand what's in the world around you, what's in your organization, and then be able to have the honest conversation about, where do you best fit? Where do I best fit? And let's move ourselves around to do that. That's not something we're doing. We're letting HR or someone else handle that. And they're using a very old model, which is that roles matter more than the people in them.
Right, right. Well, and they don't even recognize form follows function. I mean, to top that off. But I actually have an example that goes along with that, where an organization, and they actually know this, they let people off in one area who would really are necessary over here, and then they can't find the talent to be over here.
Yeah.
They let them go. And it's like and it's cultural. I mean, therein lies the challenge behind it, because you have to step back and say, what's the rationale for that? Because it's not making sense. But so there's a piece though I just want to take you down. I want to see if there's any new comments here. Well, I know that Vince says he's got to talk with me because I've triggered an idea on him. So we'll talk. Yes, Vince. Anyone can talk to either Michael or I offline.
It's good counsel, Vince. Go ahead, do that.
Exactly. But he also says Vince says we need to talk about the need for generalization. Oh, he wants to talk about it in an upcoming podcast with both of us. Yeah. So that's cool, because he has a new podcast show that he's doing. So I think about the sort of things that you're talking about. This is my vernacular. I think about, do we do a change impact assessment up front? Because that's really what you're talking about. And do we do it at all levels of the organization? And what's the framework by which we do that? And do we involve the voice of the people at the front lines and then create the opportunities for that organic dialogue? Because that's absolutely critical to happen. But, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here with you. We don't have time for that, Michael. We don't have time for that. We've got to capitalize and monetize, in the marketplace, our data, whether we monetize it externally or internally. We've got to move from, you and I even talked about this when we were working together, how do you move from an industrial company to a digital company? And I said to you, I mean, it was like one of my moments, and whether it was helpful or not, I said, you want to become digital industrial, but you're going to be industrial digital before you're digital industrial. And there's how do you do this shift for people? But everybody says we don't have time.
Yeah, it's so true. And if that's what they believe, then they're right, because they're holding themselves accountable. One of the things we talked about in the Expirational Leadership article, I pulled it up here. We threw out some new metrics. Time to failure, digital quotient, willingness to learn, a culture index, because if those old measures, if those old measures are how you gauge success and value, you're right, you don't have time. Right. Because they're short term. Now, you're not going to get that success and value in the long term, but you're going to work on those things. Interestingly, I was just reading a pre-publication copy of Dan Heath's book, Upstream, last night on the flight home from Phoenix. And he's talking about going upstream. This starts out with this joke about, this guy and these two guys are standing by a river, and they see this little kid floating down the river yelling. So they jump in to save him. And there's another one jumping to save him, 3 or 4 more. And finally, the one guy starts heading up. He goes, "Where are you going?" He goes, "I'm going to find the idiot who's throwing kids in the water." But I mean, we don't do that. We just fish the kids out. We don't kind of go upstream like that. And I think that that's the problem. If we don't know how to measure that. And we've got into this belief that we've had forever that used to really work well, that, you measure, if it matters, you can measure it. And if you can't measure it, it really doesn't matter. So it's all about what you can measure. Well, we're not in a world that's that black and white anymore, but we're still using the old paradigms. We're trying to put the new wine in the old wineskin, and it's just not working. But yet the change that we're asking people to make is not add a new model in or do something different. It's to change their worldview. And that change is so massive and overwhelming that with the pressures that are still coming down based upon the metrics in place, the measures in place, we kind of say, it's great. I believe it's the right thing. I'm not going to succeed today if I do that. And I got to take care of my family. And so we all take care and do the wrong thing because that's what we're being asked to do. And that's what we're being measured on.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. By the way, if anyone's interested, the story that Michael's talking about is a story called The Ogre. And I actually have it documented because it was used at United Way a number of years ago to actually rally people around a very huge change. So I'm delighted to hear that that'll be in a new book as well. So you talk about innovating this transformation rulebook, and that one of the things that has to be innovated is the metrics, the way we measure. Because if we continue to be measured by the old outcome measures, we aren't going to do the right things. We're not going to take the right actions.
Right.
So is that it? I mean, what else goes into that playbook? You've talked to me a little bit about, or you've mentioned it, this expirational leader. Talk more about that with us.
Sure.
Because that's what, to let all of you know who are listening in, and I'll put up when I do the recording, I'll put up a link to Michael's article on this. When I read this article, I went, that's it. I've played that role before. I get it. I understand it. Somebody finally gave a name to it. I am so grateful to you for doing that, and your colleagues. So tell us more about what that's all about, and then we can tease out the pieces.
Yeah, it's really what it's about is just saying that you need to embrace that kind of ecosystem idea. You can't do it alone. You can't bring it in. I mean, we all know this. I've played the role, God knows, where you're brought into an organization. We want you to disrupt, drive change, make a difference, challenge us, push us, change our culture. You get in there like, what are you doing? Stop pushing. Don't try to change us. What's wrong with you? You're not fitting in. Why can't you fit in? So you get inside. You can't be inside the system and drive the change. The people are stuck in the system and are seeing something new, are beating their heads against the wall and getting so frustrated. So oftentimes we'll outsource it. We'll bring in the consulting firm, and mostly what they do around change is change systems. They'll say, I'll give you a big long plan and say, oh, change the culture. What? Change the culture. How do you do that? HR will take care of it.
Right.
So it's not done. And so the expirational leader idea is that if you're a person who is able to understand and drive change and transformation, and have kind of that generalist view, to come in, partner with an organization for a set period of time at a senior level, so they know, look, you're a part of the senior team for these 2 years, and that's it. And you're going to get everything you need done. So at the end of those 2 years, you're utterly redundant. That means these are the things that we're all going to learn and work on. That means that you can trust me and have a conversation with me as an executive on the team for your own good, because I'm not here to take a chair when the music stops. And I don't know that it's the right answer, but it's something certainly like to see tried more that we haven't tried enough. It's to have these. I'm not talking so much a fractional leader, although I think that works as well. But it's that that executive that has an expiration date that allows them to not fully be a part of things and yet not be an outsider at the same time. It's a role with kind of fuzzy boundaries. We're experimenting with it. I mean, and interestingly enough, the gentleman I wrote that with, Terry Waters, has been a friend for years. I worked with him at Gartner many years ago. We wrote that when he was doing consulting work, and then he was actually asked to come in by a company and be its CEO. And so he doesn't have an expiration date. He came in to be the CEO, but we're treating what he's doing there in many ways like that. Like, okay, what do we have to do to take this PE-backed firm and move it to where it needs to go? Interestingly, he started out as a hardcore operations guy. And he said, we got to start with culture and purpose and meaning because we're competing in this area for the talent. And I started out as a soft and fuzzy HR guy, and I became much more about we got to hit the numbers and the figures and I understand what the boss is asking for. And so we partner really well. In fact, a friend of mine, Hilton Barber, will be releasing an ebook where he's going to be featuring a little bit about the work we're doing at Devada. And so he's at hiltonbarber.com, BARBOUR, and that should come up pretty soon. There's a little bit more of a deep dive into that. Not quite a case study, Lori, but similar.
Right. Well, let me tell you who I know plays this role really well. And it's military leaders. So I've had the opportunity to work with both active duty and reserve Air Force bases. And what is amazing is that these the leaders who come in to run these organizations are only there for a 2-year stint. And so that's all you got.
Yeah.
And actually it works brilliantly because you have a very defined set of time. I've been blessed to come in like at month 2 or 3 because they know exactly what they need to have done. They know the transformation that needs to take place. They and I was thinking about this last night. What is it that makes the military a bit different? And I think it's because at some level there's trust. But we got to, this is a cultural thing, right? It's kind of ingrained in you from boot camp to trust that things will move in the right direction. And this isn't always a lead. I have not worked in top-down edicts with military leaders. Most people think that that's what they do, but there are brilliant PhD executives out there in the military who know how to do the bottom up, top down, and across the organization at the same time. And so we've been able to go from 0 being in place to a full-blown transformation being in place, ready for someone to take it over when that leader leaves. And I have to leave too, because I can't stay. I'm attached to them, right? I would not make a good transition. But what we can do in that 20-month or 22-month period of time, and I know that we would always like longer, right? I think 3 years is more the norm, is that we can groom other people to, right, within their other jobs and roles to take on what we've been doing. And that's what I think you're talking about is how do we embed, how do we get it into the DNA of the organization? So now the organization becomes more, I don't know a better word, change smart, transformation smart, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that if you don't leave at the end of that time and you're not completely redundant because everything you brought to the table is now imbued in the rest of the leadership team and in the organization, then you failed. You've just been, a temporary fix. And, it's interesting. I hadn't thought at all. And I do look at that about the expirational leaders in the military because you're absolutely right. And one of the things that may lead to that, and I've done some work with Chris Fussell and Stan McChrystal at the McChrystal Group and talked to them. One of the things is that we're in an organization. Every once in a while, someone make that comment, well, hey, look, it's not life and death. But for them, it is. So there's more of an urgency, to get it right, not just look right. There's an urgency to do the smart thing, not just look smart. In many ways, while I'm sure there's aspects to it, it takes a lot of the politics out when it's about, life or death situations. And we don't have that in our organizations near as much.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to that point is that the transformations I've worked with them on could have life and death implications, but they don't appear that way on the front end.
Yeah.
Like they reveal themselves along the way. But these leaders are so amazingly connected to their people. I remember one leader I worked with, he called me up one day and he said, Ms. Silverman, I'm picking you up at 0600 hours. I'm thinking, that's awful darn early. And I'm like, what are we going to do, sir? And he said, you'll see. And we walked every hallway of the organization for an hour and a half as people came in. He had a little notepad in his pocket, and he carried on a personal conversation with all 600 people. I kid you not. I didn't even know it could be possible to do that, and he did it. And he knew where he knew exactly what time people were coming in. He knew what part of the organization to be in. It was on multiple floors, and we just traveled from floor to floor, area to area. Now, people might say, well, that's a unit of 600 people. How can you do that when you have 1 million? You figure it out, right? That's about getting your leaders to understand what their role is in a transformative, from a transformative perspective, that's their number one role and responsibility, not, like I said, that last mile piece.
Yeah. And It sounds like, well, do you have time for that? You have to get up, you don't have to get up at the crack of dawn to do that. I mean, and I don't think you'd mind sharing this at all.
Yeah.
My colleague Terry that I'm working with now, at the end of their year, there was some extra bonus they had to people who really had a great impact on the year. And that's pretty classic thing to do. Say, hey, we've got something here. We're going to surprise these people with something just because of what they put in to show they recognize it. And we're talking about it. And there was coming out like the next Monday. And this was on a Thursday. We had a conversation on Friday morning. He walked around to those, I don't know, 18, 20 people, and he found them. And he just said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that you're going to get this thank you, but I want to give you the thank you myself and tell you what it was that we saw and what it was we valued. And he goes, I had a lot to do, but it didn't ruin my day to take that little bit of time. And he said, and he goes, and it made a world of difference. And it changed, tenure, because he's a new CEO and they don't know him and they've seen other leaders come and go. And I think that we can all find those ways to be human and fit them in. Some of us love doing that. Some of us love doing that to the exclusion of getting the work done. And some of us, are not as good as doing that, but we can all find the right balance as well to really, put that humanity back into the organizations, which allows them to build the trust and function so much better.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think, though, take it to a next level, and then I'm going to ask people if they have questions for us to ask, because I do have more questions about this role, is I've worked in 100% virtual organizations where, showing up has to be done a little bit differently, but it can still be done.
Yeah.
Because there are collaborative tools to make that happen, but it's still the human contact. It's showing up in person. It's not just, I send you an email sort of thing. But what I kind of want to know about, as I'm waiting for questions to come in and other comments, is do a deeper dive into the roles and responsibilities or the backgrounds or the competencies of an expirational leader. Now, and I'm going to say that with a caveat. Because you and I have talked about this a little bit. You see this as a role. I've said to you, can it be two people, like I've done as a consultant and you're doing as well, where we partner to pick up on some of these roles and responsibilities, and so that we jointly learn together and we help the leader to grow. And so I'm not going to say that these are located in one person. I don't want to give that intent to the audience, but just know that these are things that have to get fulfilled and that need to be represented, I guess you could say. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, and certainly, the model itself is not, the Magna Carta, but what it is saying is that there has to be an outsider insider to help, and without the insiders that are also engaging and thinking like that outsider and working together, it's not going to work. And so, I mean, I would say the kind of work that you have done, the kind of work that I do with clients could be considered the same thing, right, but it's a different relationship than just here's the transactional thing I'm delivering to you. And we know this, Lori, many times you'll come in as a consultant and deliver something of tangible transactional value, but what really ends up evolving is the relationship with the key client there, that key leader that, helps them preserve their thinking time, helps them and think better. You're not giving them answers. You're creating that space for them and giving them some provocation. And it's a luxury that they end up getting many times under the guise of here's something more tangible. I think that's the problem, is we need to take it out of the shadows and say, this is valuable. This is needed. We need to work with each other this way, and we need to bring people in to be a part of this. And I'm not talking people come in and stay forever. I mean, every client I engage with in our initial kind of social contracting meeting, we talk about how long do we think we need and when can we start to wind this down? And they look at me like, wait, you're just selling me on your services. Now you want to tell me it's going to wind down. I said, yeah, because if I don't, then how effective am I going to be? If I don't see an end to this, if I don't know that it's going to end, it's easier for me to get sucked in and into the culture and not always tell you the truth and not always push you when I know it's going to make you a little bit irritated, but you'll probably get over it. I don't want to feel like I have anything to protect in this organization. So knowing when I'm going to go, one of the things you look in you asked what are kind of the attributes. I mean, it's certainly someone who knows how to help people learn and help people grow, gets the whole generalist picture. But as well, two of the things I wrote and I thought were critical. One was They have to leave when the time is done. That's it. End of story. And if you decide to have them leave before that, it's gotta hurt.
Yes.
You need to pay for it,
Yeah.
because it's going to happen where the organization pushes back and resists. And you have to be able to say, you know what? We knew this is going to happen. So here's the deal. We have to pay out the next 2.5 years of this contract regardless.
Right.
Do we want to get nothing or something for that?
Right.
And it has to be that way so that the person has the absolute safety to be very real and very honest and very straight, and to make themselves redundant.
Correct. Now, there's an interesting question that just came up from from Yulia that I want to ask here, and then I want to reinforce what you've said too before you respond. She said, "How do you prepare the organization to trust an expirational leader? This is quite a paradigm shift. And how is it different from a traditional consultant?" And so I want to just ping and then have you. So what Michael's talking about, and he and I share the same perspective here. If you look at the consulting continuum, most consulting firms are what I'm going to call to the right-hand side. They're directive, they're experts. We are talking about a consulting continuum when you're on the left-hand side. You're using the true process consulting framework that Edgar Schein so brilliantly put together, and he's elaborated on for Lord knows how many years. We are so lucky to have him, right?
Yeah.
Teaching and us. But I've had clients get angry at me over the years. So we've talked about this even in the expectations. I want the answer. Like, I'm not giving you the answer. I could give you the answer, but this is not my company. I'm inside and I'm helping you. I'm trying to get you to think it through, because here's what I know. If you think it through and you get your own ahas and your own insights, and I help you to discover that, either which you know or don't know, you will be a far more valuable individual inside the organization, or when you choose to leave, in whatever role you take as you go. And so that's a very tough thing to go through. But I think this question of trust, I mean, I know how I build it. How do you build it? I mean, this is key.
Well, so the question from Julia, you mean, or which question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think first of all, you have to just put the idea in its kind of fullness out there. And it's one of the reasons we wrote the article and published it with Leading Edge Forum, is just to get it in front of leaders and have them start talking about it. Someone mentioned earlier, I think, in one of the great comments around the asking for help is difficult.
Yes.
And so I think that it's that role modeling, asking for help. This is one of the ways that you can do it, and saying, look, we are not, as a leadership team and as an organization, where we need to be. I used to talk about this, about kind of the two types of roles and leaders that face into the need to transform, and the need to learn and to realize that what they know isn't enough anymore. There's kind of two reactions to it. One is, wait a minute, you're saying that all my career, I got to this lofty place with this wealth and this power and this status and respect because of what I knew and could do better than everyone else. And now you're telling me that all those things that I know and can do don't really apply, and I have to completely change if I'm going to be an effective leader. First reaction is no way, because then I'll feel illegitimate in the role. If that's true, my future's over and I'm in trouble. So I'm going to fight that reality as much as I can. I think that's the majority reaction. Mm-hmm. The minority reaction is, cool. You mean I got here and I'm at this place because of all the things I did, and now I have a chance to take all of that and reinvent myself and continue to lead in a new way? I want that. Those are the people that are making the changes, the ones that are aware enough and able to be bold and brave enough to do that. Unfortunately, I think they're still a minority, and I think that our organizations don't reward that. We're set up. I mean, I've been an HR guy for a long time, and I think that we're one of the biggest problems. I mean, we're setting our organizations up to mitigate risk and to make everything, flat and even and good, and we're killing an organization's ability to be riskier, to change more, to do the things that it needs to do. I just think it's I don't know how we're going to get more people there. Right now, it's a minority.
Well, and now, so let's take this to the not to the CEO role, but to the chief data officer, chief digital officer, I would like to see that D word be chief decision officer, chief analytics and data officer. I don't care what you call it. So now they're a level below in the organization. Maybe they're lucky and they're on the executive team, but sometimes they're not. They're hidden within another function, right? Can they still use this expirational leader mentality. I mean, I'm of the belief that they can, but I'm like, where are you on this? And I'm going to see if anybody comments. I mean, other than, we have Vince saying we play to win the quarter, not the game. And you're talking about the difference between short and long-term thinking. And that's absolutely the case.
100%, Vince.
But can I do this within the bowels of the organization to be able to model this? Because that's where the transformation is probably going to get housed. It's not always going to start at this top level.
Well, I think there's a different flavor maybe, and I'm not certain, but I mean, if we take that expirational leader that joins the executive team, that's one. If you take, starting to go a role or two down, people that are partnering to say, here's what I'm strong at, here's what I'm less strong, let me get the yin to my yang and bring that into my organization. I think that can happen. I think that what we see happening lower down in organizations is not so much everybody bringing in their expirational buddy, but them becoming that to each other. Because you get lower in the organization, then you have all that diversity that you need. And so building the relationships with people that cause you to think differently, that challenge the way you're thinking, building the trust and respect to do that. My friend, Michael again says being more, coach-like, building upon Ed Shine's way of interacting and personalizing with each other. I think that's where it shows up. But that means that we have to have an organization where we're not taking care of ourselves first. I love Pat Lencioni's idea of the first team being, your team of peers, not your direct reports. Well, I think as you get down in an organization, you need to build a first team as well. And part of the aspect of being on a first team is that we're going to jointly be accountable for outcomes. I'm going to give up things because you need something now. And I'm going to Vince's point, I'm going to do less in my quarter so you can do more, because we're going to do more in the long run and we're safe and we have a system that allows that. When that happens, we're fine. When we have a system that everyone's competing against each other, then we can't have that happening at this level. And our systems are built like this. They're not built like this. And I think that vertical to horizontal is one of the critical shifts that we have to make just in the spiritual shape of an organization for it to actually work in the 21st century.
Right. But that, going back again, it almost comes full circle, because it requires someone who understands what you and I have have been honored to do. And that is understanding what transformational change means, how to do it, understanding the field of organization development, because transformational change is by necessity almost always going to include some organizational design changes. It's also going to include how do we empower people at that front line, as we talked about, in terms of decision democratization. I mean, there's just so many moving parts to this. And it's also saying, is everything else around this, and it's not just culture, but it's a lot of other things, do they support this vision? So I even say to people up front, I want to know what your vision story is. I mean, I don't want to just know, oh yeah, we need to have this done by this date. I want to actually write out a story about a character, and I've done this with companies, about what does done look like, and I don't mean done like we're done like a project, but like, give me a point in time that just says, here's a character and here's a cast and crew around them. What's life going to be like for them? So I can at least start to take it to people and say, are we on the same page about what we all want? Right? Because if we're talking apples and oranges, we ain't going to the same place.
Yeah.
Really key things, but that skill set that I've just described, I don't think there's a lot of people out there like us anymore. I mean, like, we're like, I keep saying my friends have all retired.
I guess the thing I'd say though is, and this is me, and thank you, I couldn't have had a better setup. The book that I'm in the midst of writing right now, that the idea behind it is that you don't actually have to have the big theoretical understanding. What you have to have is a way to start to behave differently.
Right.
And for me, I think that some of the best behaviors that we can change is the questions we ask, either ones we haven't been asking or asking different ones. And so as I'm looking at these different, I can't share a book title yet until I work with some things with the publisher, but the subtitle I'm playing with is, building the human capabilities that change organizations for good. And what we're doing with these capabilities is saying, here's the questions you can ask that help them manifest. That's a really what, again, my friend Michael Bungay-Stanier has done with his work, is saying, look, here's some questions that unlock some different ways of working together. But for me, it's about, look, here's a specific behavior, a question, here's a circumstance in which to use it,
Right.
Ask it, just try it. And then there's a real clear and simple way to step back and say, and what just happened? I believe that. Try that new behavior, ask that question, see what happens, look at what happened and think about it, and then say, okay, what do I want to do with that? I think that's enough at most levels of an organization to actually drive the change. And what happens is some of the things that you and I had to, study for years, people will also intuitively kind of get it once they start behaving that way. They don't have to be able to speak about it or go blah, 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 like I would on a stage or use too many academic words. They just need to start living it. And that's what matters most. And I think we spent too much time, almost many of us, maybe in this profession, talking about what needs to be, as opposed to showing people how it can actually be done. That's what frustrates me with all the culture change stuff. It's like, change the culture. Here's all these theories. No, just do something different and see what happens.
Right. Well, but you have to be strategic about it. And what you're talking about is, how do we strategically ask the sorts of questions that get people to reflect on the behaviors that they're exhibiting,
Yep.
that they can shift their behaviors. And that's taking it. I mean, I think that what we're talking about is a pragmatic approach, but you have to understand up here what it is that you're kind of doing at some of the leadership levels. Because if you're going to facilitate this organizational transformation, you have to know that you're seeding these pieces. And it's not, I was trying to think of, it's not a fire in a wood burning fireplace. It's kind of the gas fire that stays on forever, right? It's
I agree. I mean, that's,
and then we'll wrap up. I have a few comments here.
So the last thing to say is, I mean, that's why I'm writing it, because for a long time I love to write, love to communicate, but what do I have to say that's different? And I finally realized that what I have to say is not necessarily different, but what I would love people to do when they come over and actually get the book out there is, the only really feedback I want is from someone organization that said, you know what, I tried that and that really worked. Wow. That really helped. I don't need them to know. And I've dug into the research and the theory, and I've done all of that to feel like that the questions I have are not perfect or not right, but they're really useful. And if I can put those useful questions out there and get people to try them and to have a moment of, I didn't think that would work, and it kind of did. I wonder what that tells me about what I believe to be true. That's, I think, the impact that I'm hoping to have. And that's what I think is what we need to start doing in our organizations. It's very, very simple, but you're right. There's a lot of thought, a lot of science, a lot of theory behind it, but we have to break it down into just tangible, easy, simple, quick.
Right. Well, but I also think that what you're saying is, it's not about being mechanistic about this.
Nope.
It's about being human about it. And it's about being far more strategic. Matt said, sounds like the expirational leader is the external consultant with the authority to act with enough tenure to experience the outcomes, would require next level trust between the parties. And then
it can be
saying that he's looking forward to the book, and it can be someone internal. I'm actually right now been doing a lot of work with business analysts, because their profession tells them that they're the change agents within organizations. And I think that they are some internal folks who can help to do this seeding that you're talking about, because their whole role has been around asking questions, to get it required. Yeah. Shifting now to a more strategic, cultural, transformational focus. But I think that, I think what we're suggesting, and tell me if I'm wrong or not as we wrap up today, is that having someone who expires that you can't fire, because they're an internal employee, because that's what you'll do with an internal, right? Oh, I'll bring you in to make the change happen, and then 3 months later, I want you out the door because it didn't work. And oh, by the way, that's your 90 days. And it can't be someone who's a traditional consultant, because traditional consultants aren't going to help necessarily to be process and orientation, and to get the organization to do the work. And the way that those contracts are set up today aren't the way that we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about someone who literally becomes part and parcel with this organization. You don't have to be there full time, but you just have to be available to be able to do this, to continue and bring the organization to continually to a new level of awareness I
Yeah,
think.
I think you're right. And I think that last comment was dead on. I mean, there's a real space for this in where the world is going, and people leaving organizations and having that ability to help and connect with people. There's a lot more people who can do this, but it is a very different model. But you're also right. It's not the only place that it happens. It's just as a clearly called out, put on a pedestal stage of this expirational thing, this person behaving in a certain way is valuable and helping us behave in that way, because then the behaviors will start everywhere. Because when the behaviors that person brings to the organization are now throughout the organization, they're not needed. It's like, my work here is done, I can move forward. But it does require a new model of the ways that we work together, and that takes some trust. One of the reasons that's working so well, even though it's slightly different, with my relationship with Terry Waters at Devada, is because we've known each other for 15 years, and there is a level of trust that we have built and a level of friendship we have built. But he also says very clearly, he goes, I know that I can trust Michael to call me on my BS.
Yeah.
And I know I can trust him to support me when I make a decision and go forward. And so it is the friendship and the relationships, caring, loving, all of these things actually being brought into our organizations make the difference. And they sound so fuzzy and soft. So we have to show how they're hard and real and make all the difference.
Well, and I think that is, to me, always when I'm walking in, that's the number one question. I want to sit down with whomever that leader is that I'm going to be working with, and we have to genuinely like each other, and we have to genuinely be open to feedback from each other, and have a set of expectations around the way we're going to communicate,
Yep.
private and also in public, because I
Yeah.
never ever want to embarrass anyone.
Yeah.
In public, but I will call you out in a one-on-one meeting and say, what the heck did you just do there?
Absolutely. Well,
For me for a second, what just happened?
well, I think, and maybe to end, you bring up something important there, is that I can play this role, and I can also be the person that needs the help.
Yes.
I'll do this for other executives. You've done this for me. There could conceivably be a time where I would do this for you, because you have that malleability. You're not like, your identity is not formed around just the advice giver, the this or the that. It's like, the give and take. And I need to give help. I need to get help. And that rhythm, that kind of, give and take of help in a relationship, it is not happening as democratically as it should, as widespread as it should.
Well, let's leave our listeners with that. And I plan to have Michael back when this book is done. We realized that we actually have the same editor, my editor from 2006, who's now at Kogan Page, which is like, oh my gosh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
You have a magnificent person to work with. So I know this book is going to be absolutely stellar.
Thank you.
As I said, for those of you who are listening today, when I post the show, I will try to remember as many of these links as Michael has raised. You can help me remember them. I'll certainly put up his article and a few other pieces. And on YouTube as well, you will have all of our contact information so that you can reach out to either of us and have longer conversations. Michael, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you with me today. Thank you for carving time out of your schedule. I'm very blessed to know you.
Well, I'm blessed to know you, and thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, please do, and reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. My website's silverbackpartners.net. And I love to connect with people. And if I can't get back to you right away, I will get back to you. But feel free to reach out if there's something you want to say or ask. And again, thank you, Lori. As always, it's a pleasure.
You're welcome. This has been episode 5 with Level Up with Lori, and I'll see you again soon.